This video demonstrates how so-called traces can be used in SAP to analyze processes and system activities in detail. Traces are an important tool for administrators, consultants, and developers to identify errors, understand performance issues, and track system access. A trace is a recording of system activities that take place in the background while transactions or applications are being used. These recordings make it possible to visualize technical processes and investigate sources of errors in a targeted manner. This video demonstrates how transactions ST01, ST05, and ST12 are used to perform different types of traces. The analysis begins with the system trace in transaction ST01, followed by an examination of the performance trace in transaction ST05, and concludes with a presentation of the combined trace via transaction ST12. System trace with ST01 first launch transaction ST01 to use the so-called system trace. The system trace is primarily intended for security and authorization analysis rather than performance analysis. After launching the transaction, a list of objects that can be logged appears in the upper section. These include, for example, HTTP calls, kernel functions, database accesses, or authorization checks. For a typical analysis of authorizations, check the box next to Authorization Checks. Optionally, you can use the General Filters button to enter a specific user to limit the recording to that user. The trace is then activated using the Trace On button. From this point on, all relevant authorization checks are recorded in the background. You can now switch to another transaction, for example transaction ME23N, to call up a document. This triggers and logs authorization checks. After performing the desired action, return to transaction ST01 and end the trace by clicking Trace Off. To run the analysis, click the Analyze button. After entering the desired criteria, click Execute to open the overview. The results list displays all authorization objects that were checked, along with information on whether the check was successful or failed. This allows you to identify missing authorizations specifically. Performance trace with ST05. Next, open transaction ST05 to run a performance trace. This trace is used to analyze database accesses and system activities and to identify performance issues. Various options appear at the top of the screen, including SQL trace, NQ trace, RFC trace, and HTTP trace. Select SQL trace to analyze database accesses. The trace is activated by clicking the Activate Trace button. Alternatively, you can use Start Trace with Filter to limit the trace to a specific user or transaction, for example. This filtering is particularly useful for avoiding unnecessarily large amounts of data. After activating the trace, switch to another transaction, such as ME21N, and perform a process step there. Meanwhile, all relevant system activities are recorded in the background. Once the action is complete, return to transaction ST05 and end the trace by selecting Deactivate Trace. To analyze the results, click the Display Trace button. In the following window, you can filter for specific traces. This is important because the number of recorded SQL commands can be very large. After selecting the desired filters, click Execute. An overview of all recorded SQL commands appears, including their execution times. This information helps identify which database accesses take a particularly long time and may need to be optimized. Combine trace with ST12. Finally, we will examine transaction ST12. This transaction combines the functions of ST05 and ST01 and allows you to run performance and system traces simultaneously. After starting transaction ST12, various options are available, including work process, current mode, or user/tasks. For a user-specific analysis, select the user/tasks option and enter the desired user. Then start the trace by clicking the Start Trace button. From this point on, both performance information, such as SQL queries, and system events, such as authorization checks, are recorded. You can now switch to another transaction, such as MM03, to call up a material master record. This triggers various system activities, which are logged in the trace. Once the action is complete, return to transaction ST12 and end the trace using End Traces and Collect. The results are then displayed automatically. This combined analysis is particularly helpful when complex errors occur and it is not clear whether they are caused by performance issues or authorization errors. A trace should only be enabled for a limited period of time, as logging consumes additional system resources and can generate large amounts of data. Therefore, it is recommended that you specify exactly which user or transaction is to be analyzed before starting a trace. That brings us to the end of the video. This video demonstrated how to use transaction ST01 to track authorization checks, how to use transaction ST05 to perform a performance trace, and how transaction ST12 combines both functions. Traces are therefore an indispensable tool for analyzing system behavior, identifying the causes of errors, and specifically improving system performance.
We hope the video helped you. In case you got any additional questions or comments, please leave a message below. See you next time, your advist-Academy.